This happened when I was about 15 in 10th grade, before cell phones in 1981. I was standing in the mall parking lot waiting for my mom to pick me up. I'd gotten a ride to the mall from an upperclassman and had agreed to meet my mom in the parking lot at 5:20. It was in West Palm Beach, Florida. As I waited, a car pulled up next to me, and the driver started talking to me through the passenger window, which they'd rolled down. He told me that I should be a model, that he was a photographer, and he had a studio nearby. He said that we could go do some practice shots. I said I was expecting my mom any minute and I couldn't leave or I'd get in big trouble if I wasn't there when she got there. He said that we'd be back in 10 minutes with pictures to show her. I said, "Here comes my mom now. You can ask her yourself." And with that, as my mom drove up, he zoomed off. I don't remember being scared, but I may have been. But it's not like we reported him or anything. It wasn't until I was 49 in 2015 that I stumbled upon a picture of him online reading a story about famous serial killers. Christopher Wilder, the beauty queen killer. He used a camera as a prop and the "you could be a model" line as his MO. I realized at that moment that I was a serial killer's fail. He targeted me as a victim, and I seriously lucked out. Still creeps me out to this day. As best as I can recollect, this encounter occurred in Rhode Island in early June 1984. At the time, there were news reports about murdered and missing young girls and a possible serial killer in nearby Connecticut along the Rhode Island border. I remember talking about it with my friends, reading about it in the local paper, but I never gave it a second thought, even when I happened to meet the killer himself. Born and raised in Rhode Island, I moved to Massachusetts the previous year when I was 19, single and working a full-time job. Most weekends I came home to see friends and do my laundry at my parents' house. On this particular day, it was the end of the weekend and I decided to stop at Beach Pond, do some fishing before heading back to Massachusetts. Beach Pond is in western Rhode Island and straddles Connecticut with the state line bisecting the lake. It's a very rural area on the Rhode Island side, with large tracts of trees and protected forests. It was mid-afternoon when I arrived, and the small park was completely desolate as I parked my car in the dirt lot and proceeded to fish just a few feet away. Route 165 was a few hundred feet to the south, and I had a clear view of a few cars driving between the two states. Before long, I watched a small car approach from the Connecticut side. It turned left into the parking area and pulled up right next to my car. A young man got out. He looked to be a few years older than me. I was about 20 at the time. And he proceeded to walk to the edge of the woods, about 50 feet behind his car and 75 feet from me. Curiously and a bit apprehensively, I kept an eye on him as he stood motionless with his hands in his pockets for at least 5, maybe 10 minutes, just staring at the ground. Then he walked over to me and immediately started with some small talk, asked about the fishing, introduced himself, shook my hand, and asked if I could spare a couple dollars for gas. I told him I really couldn't, that I had to drive back to Massachusetts 100 miles away. He told me that he didn't think he had enough gas to make it to the gas station. I asked rhetorically, "You're from Connecticut, right?" "Yes, I am," he replied. "Well, why did you drive to Rhode Island if you don't have enough gas to get back?" "I don't know. I really like it here." Then I asked, "What were you doing over there, in the woods?" "I don't know, just looking around." Standing right next to me on my left, we talked for another 30 minutes or longer. I clearly remember some of the things we talked about and feeling sorry for him. He and I had both recently been through a breakup with our girlfriends, and I told him how mine had moved to Florida a few months ago, that I had just visited her and it was clear we were no longer a couple. He related a similar story about recently going to Florida with his girlfriend and having a big fight and breaking up. I remember him saying he did something really stupid while in Florida, and that his girlfriend's father passed away while they were there. I asked what he did. He said he'd rather not get into it, and that she broke up with him because of it. Then he told me something that really stuck with me, and it's one of the reasons I never forget meeting him. I asked him if he liked to fish, and he replied, no, that he'd never gone fishing before because he'd never had time growing up. He told me how he grew up on a farm, worked 7 days a week, how he never really had any friends and never played sports. So I asked him about the farm. Did you grow corn or something? And he replied, no, chickens. It was an egg farm. He proceeded to tell me about working since he was a young child, 7 days a week on a farm in Brooklyn, Connecticut. I told him I never heard of Brooklyn, Connecticut, just the one in New York, but that I used to live in Brookline, Massachusetts. He went on to tell me that he went to college but no longer raised chickens and that the farm had been sold. I told him about my job and my trip to Florida. Our conversation went on for some time when suddenly he says, I have an idea, and quickly walked to his car. Curiously, I watched him go through the trunk of his car, rummaging around like he was looking for something. I asked, what are you looking for? Something I can sell you for gas money, he replied, then walked over to me with a road flare. Would you give me $2 for this? I really can't, I replied. I proceeded to open my wallet and show him that all I had was $7. I need to get gas myself, and I've got a long drive home. That's okay, I understand. Take it anyway. You never know when you're gonna break down on the road, he said, handing me the flare. No, I can't, I told him, but he insisted. So I took the small orange tube and put it in my tackle box, where it remained for many years. Soon I needed to leave, and my new friend walked me to my car. Packing up, I asked him, what are you gonna do? Oh, I'm not worried. Someone will come eventually, he replied. Pulling out of the dirt lot, I remember looking at him one more time, feeling sorry that I couldn't help him as we waved to one another. Over the ensuing years, I would periodically remember the strange chance encounter from time to time. Probably due to the road flare that was perennially in my tackle box, but never thought much about it. Then one night, some 20 years later, I was watching a TV documentary about a serial killer on death row in Connecticut. The show included interviews with doctors and detectives, and the man himself as he described the killings. Nothing triggered my memory until a picture flashed on the screen, showing the killer the day he was arrested, June 29th, 1984. Suddenly, a wave of recognition came over me, and the hair on my head stood on end. Then a picture of his car flashed on the screen, and my brain became flooded with memories from that day at Beach Pond 2 decades earlier. The Connecticut license plates, the large glasses he was wearing, watching him rummage through the trunk of his car. Stammering for words, I tried to tell my wife about how I met this guy many years earlier, but I'm not sure how coherent I sounded. I couldn't believe what was happening. I jumped off the couch and ran to the basement. There, in my tackle box, was the road flare that he gave me that day, so long ago. Dizzy with the realization that I met and talked at length with a serial killer years ago was unbelievably stunning. As it turns out, just 2 months earlier in April of 1984, Michael Ross raped and murdered 2 14-year-old girls right there in the dirt parking lot where I met him. I have no doubt the location where they gasped their last breaths was where I saw him standing at the edge of the woods. His final victim was murdered in Connecticut on June 13th, 1984. And from the timeline I can construct, based on my trip to Florida in May of 1984, I believe I met him just days before his last murder. If you found this interesting, I recommend you read the book, The Man in the Monster, by Martha Elliott. It's well-written yet chilling first-hand accounts of the serial killer, Michael Bruce Ross, aka the Eggman or the Roadside Killer.